still remember my first date like it was yesterday. In fact, until recently, and I've shared this story with my students a million times, but until recently, I have always said this is hands down the best date I've ever been on. And actually my mom took me on my first date, and one of the best dates I ever had. And I'll never forget it. It was for my sisters, and I have older sister, younger sister. One day we came home from school, and my mom's car was like parked outside, and we were latchkey kids, and so we weren't used to our mom getting home before us. So we at first we're thinking something was wrong, right? Because she didn't mention, that she was going to be home, and so we come in. And she's just all smiled, and she's just, Happy Valentine's Day. We like, Happy Valentine's Day. And she had transformed the whole dining room into a restaurant. She had put a tablecloth on the table, and she had little champagne and wine glasses and silverware. How it was, all the different forks and knives and spoons, that the whole table setting was there, and the lights were dim, and there was music playing, and she had the salad and bread. She had this whole spread, and some of it was still cooking, and it smelled so good. And there were flowers and teddy bears everywhere, and she was like, surprise. And I'm smiling so big right now because we were so excited. I was still in my awkward teenage adolescent phase, and so I didn't have a Valentine other than you were still putting little, cards and bags, but I didn't have anybody special at the time, and but I remember she's like, okay, we'll go upstairs. I laid out some outfits for y'all. I want y'all to get, shower, get pretty, and then come downstairs. And we were just so excited. I remember we even got into a little tussle at the top of the stairs because, 3 girls fighting for one bathroom is a mess, child. But I remember we rushed to get ready, and we came downstairs, and she had gotten ready, and it was just awesome. She had all our favorite foods on top of all the sexy food. So we call, we hood rich, right? And so for us, we had lobster. There was lobster and steak, things that, we didn't have on an everyday, occurrence. But she had went all out for us, and she gave us all roses and cards and teddy bears, and she pulled our chairs out for us. And just as we're going throughout the date, she's just showing us how to be ladies, and how to put napkin, how to go on a proper date, and her whole thing was I want you all to know how you should be treated. And I remember she was explaining the different forks and how to use each one. We're laughing, and mind you, we didn't actually have wine. We had, some little Welch's, great, bubbly, but it was so special, and it meant so much to me. I remember I would tell all my friends, and I would brag about it, and nobody's mom or parents had ever did that for them. So that was always a thing that I'm my mom did that for me, and my first date was exceptional. And while that was good, and I think it was amazing, I think that it's something that I want to be able to do when I have kids, because it was just to be so young, and while I was still figuring out what love meant to me, and what love was, and if I even believed in it, but it was something about knowing that there's a possibility that I could be treated this way in real life by a man was a lot to take in, but it was something nice to think about and to believe in. And so, unfortunately, while that was my first date, that was also, it would end up being one of my best, being the best. Contrary to popular belief, and this is in no disrespect to any of my exes or anybody who's ever taken me on a date at all. But I've never really been on a date like that. And the unfortunate part, and I know I'm not alone in this, and it could be a generational thing. Even as I dated older men, it's just, maybe it's, again, just me and the kinds of men that I chose, but I never really experienced that fairy tale love story courting and what it meant to really be courted or pursued by a man. And maybe it's I don't know, maybe if it's me, it's because I am pretty assertive and I knew how to go for what I wanted or what, but it wasn't in my cards. It wasn't in the plan where I dated men who did that. I mean, we went out and we did things, but they weren't actual like dates. And I can't really think of any of them until recently that made me really feel as special as my mom did that day. And when you think about that and you add that on top of just some of the feelings and the emotions that I was still dealing with from feeling abandoned by my father, right? And feeling broken and unloved and damaged, I think all of that played a part into what love meant to me and how I perceived it. And I know I'm not alone in this, but for a long time, and this is, I wasn't really sexually active until like high school, but for what I knew from movies and my personal experience, all I truly knew about love was intimacy, or sex. Don't get me wrong, and again, this is me saying, and I am okay with owning it, and I know all the Christians, child, and all the holier than thou people are gonna go, oh my gosh, because I'm not saying all that I was a saint, but I also don't feel like I was a hoe either. I mean, I might have, I'm saying, your girl might have thrown it back a couple of times, but it wasn't. I don't own either of them, and I'm not laughing and again playing, but I'm serious. And that I'm not condoning that, but I own my truth. And my truth is that for me, relationships were just that. It was having sex with the same person and not being condemned for it and not being called a hoe. That was relationships for me. While I appreciate them, and I think even now as I'm older, I'm learning that what I thought was love really wasn't love. And that's in both ways, not just in receipt. I think it's really important, because we talk about relationships. I think it's important that men are courted just the way that women are courted. I do believe in gender equity. I think that the same way that a woman wants to feel special, a man does too. I think even across, no matter what your pronoun is and how you identify, I think everyone wants to feel loved, and everyone wants to feel appreciated, and everyone wants to feel needed and desired. And so in the same capacity, I don't think that I necessarily showed or demonstrated that level of love either. But all I knew and what I did know was sex. And honestly, it wasn't even enjoyable for me. It was something that I did more out of obligation. I've also learned just through research and through my experience as a coach, is that for many of us, especially those of us who suffered from sexual assault or sexual abuse, either male or female, at a younger age, many a times we equate sex and love. And I was one of them. And so there were even times where I was having sex when I didn't want to. But that was the only way that I knew or understood relationships and love to be, which I've never really admitted out loud. And it feels good to say that and to own that, because I know that I'm not alone in it. Because how many of us can say that, we were actually taught and shown, properly what it means to love and to be loved. And I think it's important that we have that distinction, because there is a distinction between how you show love and how you receive love. If you have not already, I encourage you to either get the book or take Gary's quiz of the five love languages. I think it's important that you understand how you like to be loved, because if you don't understand it, then you can't properly communicate that to your partner, and they can't possibly love you back in the way that you want to be loved. And so for many of my relationships, while we were relationship by title, I can't say that I necessarily felt their love, or I don't know if they felt mine. Maybe they did, and maybe I'm just being kind of hard on myself, who knows. But I know that for me, for a long time, sex and love went hand in hand. And it's just interesting because I think that also just played a part, and because sex wasn't really enjoyable for me, on top of not really feeling like I was being courted, it just added fuel to the fire for me when it came to believing that, I was worthy of love. I would see other women and other girls my age who got the big displays of love, and it seemed like I was attracted to, and they do say that, you are what you attract. And I think because I was emotionally unavailable for so long, I had a tendency to attract men who were emotionally unavailable as well. And most of the time I just dated men who I found attractive, which it sucks, or who I had a physical connection with. And it's unfortunate, but again, I own my truth and I stand in it. And the one time that I chose to date outside of my type, and I chose to go against the grain, I think, that happens, right? Sometimes you get so tired of striking out that you go, oh, let me just try something different. Let me just color outside the lines. And when you do that, and when I did that, that's when I became a subject, to abuse. But I think, and I know for much of my life, and one of the reasons why I didn't see myself being a mother or being married, and I was probably overly invested in my career and my professional life, is because I didn't see or feel like I was worthy of love. And it wasn't until what I call, I think everyone you have to have a point in your life where you hit rock bottom, right? And not saying that I'm wishing that on anybody or believing that on anybody, but like whether you're looking at that on a spiritual tip, because when you look at the Bible, everybody who was anybody all experienced a pit, like for Joseph, a pit season, right? But I think it's because it's those moments, those defining moments that, change your life forever. And for me, I struck out so much in my relationships, but especially in my last one, when I found out that I was in love and in a relationship with a married man. And I found out that I was a mistress. And that was my breaking point. That was when I hit rock bottom, and I had finally said, like, you know what? I am done. I am empty. I am out. I have no more to give. I think that happens to a lot of us, like when you get hurt so much and so bad, and I know y'all want to hear that story and we're going to get to it. But when you've been hurt so bad and so deeply, you tell yourself, because you don't ever want to feel that pain again, and you never want to subject yourself to feeling those feelings again. You cut off the idea of it being even a possibility. And that was where I was at. And it's interesting enough, because while it was my lowest point, it was also one of my greatest moments, because it was in that moment that I truly got to embark on a different spiritual journey. I got to know God in a different way. I remember being balled up on the floor, and I'll get to that, and just saying, like, if you get me off this floor, whatever you want me to do, I will do it. That's how hurt and how empty I felt. And when when your bread and butter is you pouring into other cups, the last thing you want to feel is empty, especially when it's your job to to love and to show love and empathy, that's the last thing that you want to feel. And I remember feeling so empty, just and being tired of toxic and unhealthy relationships and love that wasn't really love. And so I told myself, you know what, I'm not getting into any more relationships until I deal with my stuff, right? I think I always tell, when I tell my students a lot, is that, you know, being careful about those black and white boxes that, you know, you see them on social media, especially on Instagram all the time, with these black and white boxes of these quotes and sayings. I always say being careful about what you choose to like and post and repost, because sometimes you're sharing and you're adopting toxic and unhealthy perspectives and messages. And I think sometimes, not sometimes, but a lot of times, like, you know, relationships, when things don't, I always say, you know, I tell my clients, it takes two to tango. So in those relationships, it's easier for me to say, oh, it was all their fault and everything was their fault and I did nothing. And that's not true. Because number one, I'm not perfect. And so I'm pretty sure that I did things and I hurt them. And they just haven't told me, maybe. But also I have to own the fact that, you know, you teach people how to treat you. And so anything that anyone has done, is currently doing or will do is because, well, for the most part, at least relationship, is because you allow them to. And so when I was being abused in different capacities, whether that's, if it wasn't my domestic violence relationship, I dated several narcissists, and men who were mentally and emotionally abusive. It was because I allowed them to. I remember one boyfriend in particular, I will never forget this, but he would never tell me that I was pretty or that I was attractive, because he felt like I heard it too much from other people. And his words were that it was his job to humble me. And it's so crazy that now as an adult, I'm just like, what the hell kind of thing to say is that? But then it made sense and I actually took it and I dealt with it. And so, you know, I don't give too much relationship advice because I'm not an expert in relationships, clearly. But the one that I do tell folks, and one that I've learned to live by, is that you teach people how to treat you. And at the end of the day, you can only love people to the extent that you love yourself. In fact, that's what God commands. He says, you know, love me first, right? But then you need to love your neighbor as much as you love yourself. And that means two things. I think it means loving yourself to the highest esteem, and then loving others to the highest esteem. Not loving others more than you, and also not loving yourself any less. And so I learned that, okay, and I had to deal and I had to own the fact that anything that I was dealing with in love had everything to do with how I loved and saw myself. And so I remember after that relationship, I told myself, you know what, Tania, no more. No more. And I said my next relationship, I was not going to go into it not loving myself, because I didn't want to subject myself to any more abuse. And I wanted to make sure that I taught them how to love me right. And so I remember going on, not saying this didn't happen immediately, this didn't happen immediately after, but eventually, you know, I decided, you know, to become celibate and to get off the market. I was not dating. And so I was meeting men, and I was just turning them down left and right. I didn't get, if God had sent my Boaz, I was like, I ain't even looking for him, child. I'm working on me. And I didn't want to embark on and get back out on the dating scene. And I wasn't having no hot girl summers until I got me right. And then, that's where my focus was. And I hate to be cliche and to say out of nowhere, I met my partner, but literally out of nowhere, I met my partner. And from the very first time that I met him, I knew that he was, number one, different, and two, that he was it. That he was the one, child. I remember, and okay, I get I don't usually share this much information, so this is literally the definition of me oversharing, and I don't do this, so you'll never get me to do this again, I'll tell you right now. I remember I had to park super far to get to work, because, you know, parking in the city is horrible. And so I'm walking from my car to my office, and this car drives past me. He says that he drove past me once, and then he busted U-E. He came back, but I didn't see that. I wasn't paying attention. But he rolled up on me, and usually when people are in the car and they talk to me, I don't even pay them any mind, just when I have my headphones in, because I am known to pretend like I can't hear. And don't you lie like you don't do it. I don't care who you are. I know you be doing it, child. You do it, child. And I did it. I usually do it. But his approach was, he was polite. He was like, excuse me, miss. And I was like, I'm sorry. I remember he said I was attractive. And I forgot all the things that he said in that. But then I was preparing. He was very attractive. And when I shook his hand, he had paint on it. So I knew he was working, and it was early. So I'm like, okay, he's up. And he's working. I was like, okay, check, but still focus. And he asked for my number, and I was actually preparing to turn him down, because I was really, when I tell you, I was so locked into working on myself, I was like really turning them down. And I remember that I said to him, you know, I'm working on myself right now. And he said to me, oh, well, I'm working on myself too. Do you mind if we work on ourselves together? Child, I about fell out. I about fell out. Number one, it was a very smooth line. I am very hard to impress, child, because I've heard all kinds of things from all kinds of men. It was a good line. But on top of that, he didn't know it until later, but it was exactly what I had wrote in my journal. You know, I think we talk about manifesting a lot, and I don't like using that term a lot, because I feel like sometimes that, in how culture says it and does it, it's like they remove God out of it. Like somehow just writing something down and believing it's going to happen, it's going to come. I believe that if it's according to God's will, it'll happen. And I believe that he makes it happen in his own time. And I feel like it's dangerous to talk about it in a different way. But I remember I had watched this sermon, and they had said that, you know, that it's important that, you know, God can't give you, you know, what you don't ask for. You know, closed mouths don't get fed. And so you're like, you know, write it down, like make it plain, your vision. And I remember I had wrote down, I'm not going to get into those things, but I had wrote down 6 things that I was looking for. Only 6, because I learned, child, you ain't going to get everything on your list, so you gotta ask for your essentials. Okay, well, listen, God, I don't need him to be none of that. I just need him to have these things right here, please. And one of them was really about, I knew that I was working through a lot of trauma. I was still kind of going to therapy, and I was working through a lot of stuff, and I knew that it's important that, you know, when you meet somebody, that you don't just marry, you don't just get with them, you get with them in their history. And I knew that if anybody's gonna get with me, they're taking me and all of my stuff. And it was important for me that, you know, they understood, whoever my next partner was, that I was still working through my trauma, and I needed a space to do that. But then also I wanted somebody who was just as invested in their own development and their own growth. And so I needed somebody who was also working on them, because I was not taking on any more projects. I was done with the projects, child. Literally, the projects and the projects. The hood projects and the male projects. I was not taking on anymore. I had broken bird syndrome. I was like, I ain't taking on no more projects. I wanted to be a full me and a whole me, and I wanted to be with someone who was a whole them. And so I had wrote that word for word in my journal. And when he said it, I was like, okay, you know it's transformational when you and so I ended up giving him my number, and so we ended up talking, and from day one he was just somebody who was very easy to talk to, and he was somebody, and I think because I was very clear about where I was at in my trauma, and I wasn't like, didn't tell him my whole life story, but he knew enough in our first couple of conversations, kind of where I was at, and that I wasn't looking for anything serious at that time, that it felt so effortless from the very, very beginning. And it's interesting because he also came at like just the worst. It's like, it's always like the best things come at the worst times, child. And I was just having so many challenges with my job, and I was in a lot of transition. Child, after our first couple of conversations, not saying that I forgot about him, but I had so many things. It was like I had a big event at work, and I had so many things happening at work that I had looked up one day and I had left him on red for like several days. And I was like, oh my God, I was like, F, I ruined it. And I remember I told my best friend, like, I ruined it. She said, girl, if you don't go and try again. This is like my childhood best friend. I don't have many friends, but this is somebody I've been best friends since we were 12. And so if nobody else knows me, she has seen me through all of my raggedy. And so she's like, if you don't suck it up and shoot your shot. I said, what if you don't answer? She said, well, if you don't answer, then he ain't it. But she said, from what you told me so far, it sounds like he's it, child. And so I was like, all right, let me just do it. And so I always said, if we got married, that she has to be in the wedding because she saved us, okay, child? Because I was about to be like, man, F it. But I ended up shooting my shot again this time. And again, in true him fashion, he catches everything I throw at him. And I had what I now consider one of the best dates ever. And it may not be for other people, but I think it was the best date for me because it was for me. I'm a giver. And I think when you're a giver, sometimes when you're a giver, you don't know how to receive. And one thing about my partner that I've loved since day one is that he's a giver. And so our first date, first off, and mind you, I'm all about presentation. I've done enough pageants, and I've learned that it's important to be on all the time. And my mom did not play that. She was a very much like, get off your knees, don't do this, don't do this. She was really big on that. And so I never forget. He called me, he was like, what you doing? I was like, oh, I'm getting coffee. He's like, oh, well, get dressed and be there in 20 minutes. We're going out today. I was like, no, we can't go. I'm like, no, we can't go out. I had two broken nails. My lashes were raggedy. I didn't have a haircut. I was just not put together. It was the worst possible time to go on a date. And I'm like, I'm not ready. He's like, I don't care about that. I'll be there in like 20 minutes. And he was, and I was not ready. I'm like, oh my gosh, like I need more time. And he sat in the car and he waited. He waited. He was so patient. He waited. He's like, it's fine. I'll be here. He just waited. And I love that about him too. But then, and I think that played out constantly. He's somebody who I never had to be on for. I could have half of my lashes missing. I could feel like the raggediest person in the world, and he'll be like, you're fine, you're beautiful. Like, it's just like, I don't have a bad day. And just like from that first conversation, even to now, he just notices every little thing. And so when I do change my hair and I do change my nails and I did change my lashes, anything that I changed, he saw it and he caught on. And I've loved that since day one. And so we finally, go on the date. Now, this is something funny that I think is always funny to share because he didn't open my door. And so, he had already waited for me. And so I was like, it's cool. I'm going to just get in. But then when we got out at the restaurant, I did nothing, like I remember I had a student like, Tania, what do you do? I said, I did nothing. And then when he saw that I didn't get out, he opened the door. I said, I appreciate you. I became a woman and I was down south. Okay. And one thing about down south that I love is the Southern hospitality. And so I dealt with men who didn't let women pick up chairs, and they didn't do that. It was like, no, Tania, you're a lady, let me get it. So I've grown accustomed to that way of life, and I love it. And so I just sat there, and then he opened the door, and that is the first and the last time I've ever had to tell him to open the door. And so he catches on quick, okay? They catch on quick, ladies. You gotta teach them how to treat you, okay? But so we went. And we had a reservation, but like everything was running behind. And so we had time. And we didn't want to sit in there because it was crowded, you know, in the pandemic or whatever. And so we had passed by a Barnes and Noble. And I'm like, oh, we have time. Can we go back to that Barnes and Noble? I want to get a couple of books. I love to read. And so, and usually, again, people know I love to read, but I've never met anybody who really like cared about what I was reading. And so he was like, sure. And so he walked to the Barnes and Noble, and y'all, he let me drag him all around Barnes and Noble. I literally, from the kid books to the books I was actually buying, I didn't even know why I was oversharing, but he created that space where I felt like I could share. And so I did. And so I was showing him the books that I read, and telling him about just, you know, my life, and like just, you know, not everything, but I was telling him and opening up more than I've ever opened up before. And it felt, I wasn't scared to do it. It was very natural to do it. And even better is that, you know, he talked back, child. I was like, oh, he knows stuff. I would say something, and usually, like, you know, people had a tendency to call me a nerd and make fun of me whenever like I get on my little rants about, you know, 'cause I love learning, I love knowing new things, and usually people give me a hard time, but he was with me, child, the whole time. I was like, oh yeah, like yeah. And it turns out like that we liked a lot of the same things that we had, you know, and he was just as well read as I was, and it was nice to find somebody who I had a lot in common with. And we were probably in there way too long, but he was so patient, and I loved it. So yeah, I always to the register, and mind you, I had quite a few in my hand by the time we finished, and so I was ready to pay for them. He was like, "Oh no, you're not paying for anything today," and it's almost like the fact that I even thought that I was he was like insulted, like, and he didn't. It wasn't no cheap stack of books, so I was not complaining. I was like, "Oh, all right now." It was awesome. And so we come out, and we're about to walk and go back to the restaurant, but then we passed by another restaurant, and he remembered that, and it was like it had been weeks prior, but I had told him that my favorite food was Japanese, and he remembered, and he was like, "Isn't your favorite food Japanese?" I'm like, "Yeah." He was like, "You want to go in here?" I was like, "But we have reservations, you know." He's like, "Do you want to go in here?" I said, "Yes." And we ended up going in there, and the rest is not history, but I was just like, I got back home, I called his friend, I said, "Ciao." And it was great. It was great. And I think, you know, a lot of times we share those stories and it's like, oh, like it's all a fairy tale. But it wasn't. And it wasn't after that, because then I got scared, child. I got scared. I think sometimes, and I'm not alone in this, but sometimes when you're so used to unhealthy and so used to toxic or so used to just a certain way of doing something, that when something different is placed in front of you and something healthy is placed in front of you, it's natural to be scared and intimidated. And I went from excited and oh my gosh to oh my gosh. And it freaked me out because I was so used. I'm a planner, and I'm somebody who, because of all that I've been through, I feel the most secure when I'm in control, and I felt like I was not in control at all. And so I feel like a lot of, especially early on in our relationship, I was trying to keep everything. It felt like the more I tried to keep all of my feelings and everything under control, the more all of it unraveled. And poor baby probably thought I was crazy. He be fine. Like, I don't know what I got myself into, child. And it was hard, but it's also one of the reasons why I wanted somebody, and I asked God for somebody who was okay with me working on myself, because I knew that I was going to be a work in progress. And I'll be fully transparent, because sometimes when you don't know what you have and when you aren't used to something, you take it for granted and you can misuse or abuse it. And I can admit, I think that women don't do it enough. But I always say I'm never too big to say I'm sorry. And I think because I was still figuring out me, and let alone to figure out him, on top of having so much of like my life with like literally everything that could go wrong was going wrong in my life outside of him. And I didn't know, I felt like it was still too early to let him in on that part. And so I was probably I was reacting all kinds of ways. And he was probably so confused. And, being a loner and going through trauma, and I think for me, I'm always being afraid of being judged. I have a tendency, and I still do sometimes, that when I'm going through stuff, I self-isolate, right? Many of us do, we self-isolate. But we saw from the pandemic that isn't good either. And so I was going through all these things, figuring out what I wanted from them, and self-isolating at the same time. And that's something that you can't do when you're in relationships. And so I feel like I may have fumbled that in the beginning, but I think it's important with any kind of relationship of, if people, and I say all the time, if people can't have your blues, they don't deserve your rhythm. And so I think it's important to find people who can take you at yours and who can take you at your best. And mind you, we've had our share of challenges and ups and downs, and I've had so much life happen to me, and he's had so much life happen to him, and we're still figuring a lot of things out. But one thing that I have always loved and appreciated is that no matter how raggedy I was, it's not saying that he wasn't raggedy, because everybody, again, it takes two to tango, and everybody brings their stuff and their raggedy to any platonic or romantic or any kind of relationship. But one thing about him is that no matter how raggedy I was or I am, I know if and when I call him, if and when I need him. No questions asked, he's pulling up for me. And if he pulling up, he ain't asking you no questions either. And I love that, because when you understand all that I've been through, that was also one of the things on my list of wanting to feel secure and wanting to feel safe. And so literally, I remember one day I was like just happening to be flipping through my journal. Look, I have 1,000,001 journals, so I can't even tell you which one it was anymore. I was flipping through my journal, I was looking for something else. And I ran up on that list that I wrote and all the things that I asked God for. And I just started checking off the things that, hey, maybe he might be it, right? Child, I started checking off all the things, everything on the list. Everything on the list. And it's almost scary to think that sometimes because something, again, like I keep saying, because we expect it, sometimes we miss out on good things because we expect it to come from a different place or in a different package. And not saying that I don't love the package that mine came in, but I don't know what I was expecting, but I didn't expect it so soon. I didn't expect it then, because I was still working through my stuff. But I'm so grateful. I think any kind of encouragement, if I can give any words of anything to anybody, I think this relationship has taught me, number one, is that there's no such thing as being 100% before. Like, you don't have to be 100% before you meet someone. I was stressing myself out trying to be perfect and fix every little kink and thing about me before I jumped into a relationship. But I wanted to be, sure. But you're always growing. I tell my students, you're always, our temple mascot is the owl. And so our logo is the owl and the egg. And I tell my students, you are always in the egg. You're always growing and evolving. And the best relationships aren't people who can only take you when you're not in egg form. The best relationships are people who can take you and you're good and you're bad and you're ugly, and who can grow with you. And I think it's to give it, if you so whoever's out there and you're feeling broken and damaged, and it's like, no, baby, the right one is going to love you through it. The right one's going to see you through it. And I know they say it sounds so cliche. I'm not saying when you don't think about it. I think we all want to be loved, and we all want, everyone craves relationship. But it wasn't until I truly made the commitment to love myself first. And you saw, I still almost fumbled the bag, child. Fumble the bag means I messed up the opportunity for my non-Black listeners. But, and that was with me after years of taking a break and then working on myself. You really, it is, I get what they mean. They say you have to be whole before you can be with somebody else. That's number one. And the right one, again, will work you. And again, even my king, some of them about me, he'd be like, hell yeah. Sometimes he don't pay me no mind. He don't even pay me no mind. Things that you would think would scare you won't scare the right one off. I remember a friend of mine said that to me. She said, Tania, you won't be too much. I was always afraid of being too much and scaring him off with all my crap. And she told me, I never forget, she's like, Tania, you'll never be too much for the right person. And you'll never scare off the person who's meant for you. And I wholeheartedly believe that. I think I'm also learning and the importance of not getting too caught up in the picture perfect social media look of a relationship, but understand that it's hard work, because just how you have to work on yourself and they are working on themselves as individuals, you have to also be able to work on yourselves together. And while it was easy to write, it isn't always the easiest to carry out. But I have learned, and I'm so grateful and so thankful, but I have learned through experience that the right person, good, bad, ugly, will make it all worth it. And sometimes you gotta kiss a few frogs to find your prince or your princess. When it happens, you'll know. You'll know. And even when you won't, and even when you don't, he does. And I am forever grateful.